This is NTD Evening News. Live from our NTD Global Headquarters in New York City, here is Tiffany Meyer.
Good evening and thank you for joining us tonight. I'm Don Ma filling in for Tiffany Meyer. Texas, now after all, allowed to arrest and deport illegal immigrants. The Supreme Court made the decision this afternoon. This comes as officials finally agree on funding for Homeland Security and all other government agencies.
The Supreme Court on Tuesday cleared the way for Texas to start enforcing its new immigration law. It gives state authorities the ability to arrest illegal immigrants for trespassing and allows state judges to deport them. When signing the bill in December, Texas Governor Greg Abbott explained the goal of the law.
To stop the tidal wave of illegal entry into Texas.
The bill sets a historic precedent because immigration has always been the job of the federal government, not individual states. Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton commented on Tuesday's Supreme Court decision, calling it a huge win, saying Texas has defeated the Biden administration's and ACLU's challenges. But as Abbott is pointing out, quote, we still have to have hearings in the Fifth Circuit Federal Court of Appeals. The Supreme Court decision only allows the law to go forward while lower courts consider it. Meanwhile, in other immigration-related news, some Republican representatives want their colleagues to use the power of the purse and reject upcoming government funding bills. That's if no deals regarding border security are made. 43 representatives signed this letter on Monday, saying, quote, the next government appropriations package funds multiple avenues Biden exploits to release millions into America. The letters came shortly before the White House and congressional leaders said on Tuesday that they finally reached a deal to fund the government for the rest of the year. This, as we're almost 6 months into the fiscal year, halfway through. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer said that lawmakers, quote, are in the process of finalizing text and reports for Congress to closely review and consider ASAP. Once the bill's texts are finalized, the House gives congressional lawmakers 72 hours to review them. Funding for several key agencies runs out at midnight on Friday, so they'll shut down if the bills aren't passed by then.
Former President Trump takes his case to the Supreme Court. He's asking the justices to toss the federal election case. In a brief filed earlier today, Trump's lawyers argued that he enjoys presidential immunity for official acts made in the White House. They wrote that a president, quote, cannot function and the presidency itself cannot retain its vital independence if the president faces criminal prosecution for official acts once he leaves office. The Supreme Court will hear arguments in the case on April 25th. Lower courts have twice rejected Trump's immunity claims. And in Trump's classified documents case, a federal judge requested a preview of proposed jury instructions, not one set of instructions, but two. She's trying to decide whether Trump's possession of the documents was unauthorized. Our legal correspondent Arlene Richards breaks down the details and updates us on a lawsuit filed by the former president against ABC News.
A federal judge is looking for a solution to a question it seems she can't answer. In the Florida classified documents case, Judge Eileen Cannon asked for two sets of jury instructions. In an order filed Monday, Cannon requested preliminary proposed jury instructions, which means she wants both sides to submit instructions before a jury hears the case. The reason? To address competing theories on whether former President Trump was allowed to keep classified documents. Those theories hinge on two different legal acts. According to the indictment, Trump was not authorized to possess or retain those classified documents under the Espionage Act because it posed a national security risk. Special counsel Jack Smith says those records should be deemed presidential and stored in the National Archives. But Trump's attorneys argued in a court filing that under the Presidential Records Act, the former president designated those records as personal. And when they became personal, no one could review them. Now, Judge Cannon wants each party to create two separate jury instructions, one that would allow the jury to review the records to determine whether they are presidential, and one in which the president has deemed the records personal and the jury is not allowed to review them. Judge Cannon heard oral arguments last Thursday on two motions to dismiss counts 1 through 32 of the indictment. She immediately dismissed the first motion, which challenged the Espionage Act charges. She said the issue should be raised later in connection with jury instructions. And she stated during the arguments that the claim under the Presidential Records Act should also be raised later. The new order is an effort by the judge to address these issues before the trial begins. The unusual request leads both sides to ponder hypotheticals that haven't been reviewed in any other court. Meanwhile, in other Trump legal action, the former president sued ABC News and anchor George Stephanopoulos for defamation. He claims the anchor said Trump was found liable for rape when he wasn't. Arlene Richards, NTD News.
It's primary day in 5 states. President Biden campaigning in key swing states as former President Trump decries what he calls election interference. NTD's White House correspondent Iris Tao has more.
As primaries unfold today in Arizona, Florida, Illinois, Kansas, and Ohio, neither Trump nor Biden is going to appear in any of those states, as both of them have clinched their party's nominations. Instead, President Biden is on a 3-day campaign swing in the Sun Belt, mostly to court Latino voters. Here's what he said about a rematch with Trump while in Nevada.
Last week, Donald Trump and I clinched the nominations. We're going to beat him again. I feel really good as I go around the country, not a joke.
While Biden won nearly 60% of Latino voters in 2020, recent polling has shown Trump expanding his standing with them, as some Latinos are increasingly responding to Trump's policies on the economy and immigration. Trump today, meanwhile, is decrying election interference over a New York judge's ruling to make him post nearly $500 million in bond next week. And Trump says that's even before he's going to get to appeal. Trump wrote on Truth Social, quote, "I would be forced to mortgage or sell gray assets, perhaps at fire sale prices, and if and when I win the appeal, they would be gone. Does that make sense?" And Trump's lawyers have said that Trump is unable to post that bond, as Trump says that most bonding companies haven't even heard of a bond of that size, let alone being able to afford it. Reporting from the White House, Iris Tao, NTD News.
And turning our attention to the Israel-Hamas conflict, Israel Defense Forces and more than 300 terror suspects have been detained during a raid at the Shifa hospital in Gaza. They allegedly include dozens of prominent Hamas operatives and Islamic Jihad terrorists. Officials said the suspects were allegedly involved in directing terror attacks in the West Bank. They're facing interrogation by field troops before being taken to Israel for further investigation. Meanwhile, a United Nations-backed report warned of a famine outbreak in northern Gaza, which can happen at any time between now and May. U.S. and Israeli officials will likely meet in Washington, D.C. next week. The two sides will talk about alternatives to a ground offensive in Gaza's southern city of Rafah. Former President Trump's trade advisor, Peter Navarro, begins his prison term today. He was found guilty in September of contempt of Congress for defying a subpoena from the House January 6 committee. Just before reporting in, he spoke right outside the prison in Miami, Florida.
When I walk in that prison today, the justice system, such as it is, will have done a crippling blow to the constitutional separation of powers and executive privilege. The second and related story has to do with the emergence of lawfare and the partisan weaponization of our justice system. If a president does not have the ability between and among his advisors to get confidential information in the sanctity of the Oval Office, he will make poor decisions which will harm the republic. That's what this is about.
The former presidential advisor was convicted for defying a subpoena from the House January 6 committee. He is the first former White House official in history to be imprisoned for a contempt of Congress conviction. Navarro called his prosecution an exercise in lawfare and a disservice to the Constitution. He added that his conviction will hinder any future president's confidence in their advisors. Joining me now to discuss Peter Navarro's prison sentence is David Gelman, criminal defense attorney and former federal prosecutor. All right, David, thanks for joining us today. Let's just get to the chase here. So is it a crime for a senior White House official to not comply with the subpoena?
Hey, Don. No, it really is not a crime for the simple reason that Peter Navarro, in this situation, he should have had presidential immunity, meaning that when you are an aide or when you work in the White House and you have communications with the President of the United States of America, any communications that you have with the President are privileged communication, meaning that you are not allowed to use said communications if the President of the United States of America says they are privileged. So if I am an aide there and I say, and the President and I are talking, and he says, hey, you can't say this to anybody else, I'm not allowed to say it. Just like attorney-client privilege, same concept.
Okay, let me get your reaction on this then, because U.S. Solicitor General Elizabeth Pelogar says that even a successful claim of executive privilege would not excuse applicants' total failure to comply with the subpoena. What do you think?
So, I don't believe that she's right. And even if she was, what happened today, pretty much what happened, the DOJ took a sledgehammer to 250 years of standard practice and just completely crushed it. There's been 250 years that never, and I mean never, has a White House aide ever been jailed for defying a subpoena. Okay, so Eric Holder, did he ever get jailed for defying a subpoena? No. The only reason that Peter Navarro is being jailed today is because he is being associated with Donald Trump. That is the only reason. If he was associated with any other White House or any other candidate for that matter, he'd be on a beach right now sipping a pina colada probably. So this is a total sham. He is a political prisoner.
Given this ruling, does that give Congress more power in the future in terms of subpoena ability?
It probably does. But if you look at it, what are the subpoenas doing right now? Look at Hunter Biden. He defied a subpoena. Where is he at right now? He's on the street. He's just parading around in his multi-million-dollar home in Malibu, California. So again, you're looking at a two-tier justice system right now. The liberals and the Democrats have a one way and Republicans have another way.
A lot of people, based on certain surveys, think that potentially there has been some sort of weaponization, whether it's the FBI or another agency. Is there any truth to that?
It really seems like it is, Don. And it's a shame because the DOJ, they're supposed to be an independent arm of the administration. However, they're certainly not looking like it is right now. You look at what they're doing to Peter Navarro, to January 6th individuals, to all these other cases, to Donald Trump, perfect example. They're all going against Joe Biden. And why is that? I wonder if that is because they are afraid that because they are going against Joe Biden in the election, potentially, or that they're a threat to the democracy or the old guard, if you will. And this is not what the DOJ is supposed to be. They're supposed to be independent. But you know what? Merrick Garland, he is taking orders and nothing is going to be done unless Trump wins and the Biden administration goes away. And until that happens, this is what, it's going to be status quo. And it's a shame. It really is. The founding fathers did not want to have this.
All right, David, maybe just one more question. Taking a step back here, this ruling, what are the consequences for the entire country going forward?
Well, I'll tell you what, the consequences are if you do not go by the book and if you do not comply with a subpoena, as a Republican, you know what? You're done. You're going to jail. If you are a Democrat and you do not comply with a subpoena, you might have a good chance of walking the streets. But again, you have a two-tier justice system right now, and it is a complete mockery. It might as well be in Haiti right now, looking at the news with all the fires and everything like that, like Mr. Barbecue. But but right now, this is like a third world country we're living in our judicial system. It's a complete outrage, and we should all be ashamed of what we're doing.
All right, David Gelman, criminal defense attorney and former federal prosecutor, thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you for having me, Don.
Two retired U.S. generals testifying before the House Foreign Affairs Committee today. It's part of an investigation into the Biden administration's 2021 withdrawal from Afghanistan and its consequences. Our Washington correspondent Luis Martinez joins us live from the Capitol. Luis, what can you tell us about today's hearing?
Good evening. Yes, as you just mentioned, the House Committee on Foreign Affairs held a 4-hour hearing today. The former chair of the Joint Chief of Staff, General Mark Milley, and the former head of Central Command, General Kenneth McKenzie, testified before lawmakers on the withdrawal from Afghanistan during the Biden administration's 2021 handling of this crisis. General Mark Milley is testifying before Congress for the first time since he left active duty last year, being the highest ranking member of the U.S. Armed Forces. General Milley reiterated during today's opening statements and several times during his testimony how his assessment of the withdrawal was that it was a strategic failure. Let's listen to General Mark Milley.
On 14 August, the non-combatant evacuation operation decision was made by the Department of State, and the U.S. military alerted, marshaled, mobilized, and rapidly deployed faster than any military in the world could ever do. It is my assessment that that decision came too late.
General Kenneth McKenzie on his part also lamented the withdrawal and pointed out at lapses in information from the State Department, including that the State Department's request for an emergency evacuation of the Kabul embassy was relayed to the Department of Defense 2 days after the Taliban had already surrounded Kabul back in 2021. During today's hearing, the Republican ranking member, Congressman Michael McCaul, also read the list of 13 service members who died during that terrorist attack at Abbey Gate on the 26th of August of 2021. And Congressman Michael McCaul also highlighted the role that allies played during that withdrawal. Let's listen to what Congressman Michael McCaul had to say today.
On August 30th, 2021, more than 1,000 American citizens remained trapped in Afghanistan, as were tens of thousands of Afghan allies who risked their lives serving beside our troops and diplomats. Many, if not most, of those allies are still trapped, constantly in fear for their lives.
The Democratic ranking member, Congressman Gregory Meeks, pointed his fingers at the Trump administration and blamed former President Donald Trump for the debacle that was the withdrawal from Afghanistan in August 2021. Let's listen to what ranking member Gregory Meeks had to say.
During the transition between the Trump and Biden administrations, it also became clear that the Trump administration lacked a comprehensive plan for withdrawing from Afghanistan, despite the May 1st deadline fast approaching.
After the 4-hour hearing, I also got to speak with Congressman Mike Waltz, a Republican from Florida, and he made it clear that today's hearing was not necessarily about who was responsible for the events of the Afghan withdrawal of 2021, but who should be held accountable so it doesn't happen again. Back to you.
All right, thank you very much for that update, Luis. Former Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro has been officially accused of falsifying his COVID-19 vaccination data today. Brazil's Supreme Court document claims he and 16 associates allegedly manipulated a health database to falsely show vaccinations for himself, his daughter, and close contacts. This manipulation reportedly happened before his December 2022 trip to the U.S. after Bolsonaro lost re-election to Brazil's current president. According to Reuters, the ex-president reaffirmed he had not taken the COVID-19 vaccine. His lawyers denounces the charges as political persecution, emphasizing Bolsonaro's exemption from vaccination proof as president. Throughout the pandemic, Bolsonaro notably opposed vaccinations, rejecting an offer from Pfizer to supply Brazil shots, and he critiqued the decision to purchase vaccines from Chinese firm. If convicted, Bolsonaro could face a prison term ranging from 2 to 12 years. Hong Kong moving one step closer to communist mainland China. The city's pro-Beijing parliament passed a new law today that gives authorities more power to quash dissent. Authorities can now hand people life imprisonment over vague political charges like treason. There are also heavier penalties for crimes like sedition. It expands on the current national security law, which effectively put an end to free speech in Hong Kong in 2020. After that, some pro-democracy activists were arrested, while others fled to other countries and applied for asylum. The new law, which was fast-tracked, is set to go into effect on March 23rd. Analysts say it could dampen international business, as it also targets external interference and the theft of state secrets. This means it could also affect everyone from lawyers and ambassadors to reporters and researchers. Joining me now to discuss the GOP Senate primary in Ohio is Robin Biro. He's a Democratic strategist and former Obama regional campaign director. Biro is running for state Senate in Georgia as a Democrat. Thank you very much for joining us, Robin. So to start off, I want to ask you, what is the landscape right now for the Ohio Senate race?
Oh, this is a tricky race. Look, all eyes will be on Ohio tonight to see how much weight Donald Trump's endorsement still carries. Bernie Moreno, Republican candidate there, he is trying to shake off some scandal this week because apparently he's saying that an old staffer put up some, I guess, adult website material back from 2008 of his somehow. I don't know how that happened. And they're trying to distance themselves from that, but got Donald Trump's endorsement. On the other hand, we've got Matt Doman, who is funding his own campaign. And I've typically advised candidates that that's a big mistake, but he's running as a moderate. He's self-funded, he's got deep pockets. So this will be an interesting race to see how it plays out. What is the significance of the race? The significance of this race is to see if there's any appetite at all for a moderate. How much weight Donald Trump's endorsement carries. We've seen about 60% or so of his endorsed candidates prevail. So I think that will likely be the case. I'll tell you personally, both the Trump campaign and the Biden campaign are paying close attention to this match. They're, of course, on the ballot as well. They are already the nominees, presumptive nominees, but we are eager to see how the numbers play out for their races as well, but also for this Senate race. It signifies exactly what the appetite is for Donald Trump, almost on a national scale. And speaking of Biden's campaign, let's talk about it. How is he doing in Georgia? He's underwater in Georgia, which I think he's paying attention to that because he's been here 3 times within the last month. I will say he's outraising Donald Trump quite substantially, actually. So, you know, there is enthusiasm actually for his campaign, and I'm glad to see him getting back out there and being a forceful candidate, being more aggressive. So how Biden is doing right now in Georgia, is this indicative of how Georgians might vote in the general election? Yes, and that spells trouble for me because I am running in the general election for state Senate. So this affects down ballot races like mine quite a bit. I have a Republican challenger. This is a safe Democratic seat, but this could spell trouble for me and other down ballot candidates. All right. As always, Robin, thank you very much for your time. It's been my pleasure. Thank you. And tonight, NTD Steve Lance and Tiffany Meyer take a deep dive into this election's most pressing issues as voters cast their ballots across the country for their nominee. Catch all the action and results live today, March 19th at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time, right here on NTD News. Turning our attention now to Mississippi. A former police officer was just sentenced to 20 years in prison for torturing 2 men in January last year. Hunter Elward, a former Mississippi Sheriff's deputy, and 5 other officers in Rankin County pleaded guilty.
The 6 officers admitted they entered a home without warrant after a call from a neighbor saying that 2 black men were staying in a home with a white woman. Inside the home, the officers handcuffed, kicked, waterboarded, tased, and attempted to sexually assault the 2 men, Michael Jenkins and Eddie Parker. One of the deputies put a gun in Jenkins' mouth and shot him. His injuries include a lacerated tongue and broken jaw. The incident lasted nearly 2 hours. Parker and Jenkins, both of whom are black, filed a federal civil rights lawsuit last year in June.
They never asked to be on the front page. They've never been in front of cameras, and they've undergone, from what you heard in there, a substantial amount of trauma. So I just want you to understand and be patient with what they're going through, because it's very emotional and it's very trying.
In an emotional court hearing on Tuesday, Elward addressed the victims directly. He said, quote, "I'm so sorry that I caused that. I hate myself for it. I hate that I gave you that. I accept all responsibility." Prosecutors said some of the officers called themselves the Goon Squad because of their willingness to use excessive force and not report it. Elward's father spoke to the media after the sentencing.
Your lawyer, his lawyer, made it absolutely clear that this was something that was going on inside that sheriff's department for quite some time and that he was taught that. Do you believe that?
I do. Absolutely.
What do you believe? Because most people couldn't hear it because it's obviously in court, but do you believe there was someone teaching these practices to the
Absolutely. They as soon as he started 7 years ago, Brett McAlpin, the only way they could get overtime was to work with those guys. And the new recruits, the younger guys that are coming in, that need the overtime, that got the little babies and stuff, that's how they bring them in. You know, that's the only way you can get overtime is to work with the goon guys.
Elward faced the most serious of federal charges among the 6 officers. The other 5 officers will be sentenced later this week. They each face up to 20 years in prison. Reporting by Allison Lee, NTD News.
A lawsuit against multiple social media platforms moving forward. It stems from a supermarket shooting in Buffalo, New York that killed 10 black people. Attorneys for the social media companies argue they only provide a platform and thus not liable for hate content. However, the judge found third-party content could be considered a product of the sites. A judge denied a motion to have the lawsuit dropped against several social media companies like Reddit and Instagram. The civil suit was filed by the families of those killed in the 2022 shooting at a Tops supermarket in Buffalo, New York. The lawsuit alleges hateful and extremist content on the social media sites contributed to the radicalization of the gunman. Peyton Gendron was 18 years old when he walked into the Tops supermarket and opened fire. He's currently serving a life sentence in his New York State case. He also faces hate crimes and firearms charges at the federal level. A groundbreaking shift is likely to hit the real estate industry, getting rid of the standard 6% agent commission. How would this affect home buyers? NTD's Virginia Gibson has more.
A dramatic change is likely to hit real estate. Normally, the home seller pays a commission to both the seller's agent and the buyer's agent, around 3% to both. But after a landmark court settlement involving the National Association of Realtors, buyers and sellers may be able to negotiate all of this. Buyers may even have to pay their own agents.
I think this works very favorably for the buyers. I think it also works favorably for the sellers.
Peter Gray is the president of Pyramid Real Estate Group. He believes buyers don't necessarily even need an agent.
In this day with the internet, brokers, I don't know that they add the kind of value that they used to. Certainly we need someone to market a property and advise and help sellers to get it ready and to put it on the market. But a buyer's rep, the internet really has made a lot more things accessible.
For decades, sellers have been raising a home's price because they have to pay the buyer's agent's commission. They may not raise the price if the buyer doesn't use an agent. Some buyers may want an agent because of convenience and the agent's expertise. These buyers may have to budget for additional costs and negotiate the payment structure. Virginia Gibson, NTD News.
And now for your sports news, we're joined by NTD's Dave Martin. Dave, so Clemson University is now suing the Atlantic Coast Conference over their, quote, exorbitant exit fees. What seems to be the reason for this?
Yeah, it seems they won out of the Atlantic Coast Conference, or ACC as they're known. You know, it's really all about the money. The ACC has fallen way behind the SEC and Big Ten in terms of payouts to their members. Now, the exit fees are one thing. I believe it's supposed to be 3 times the ACC's operating budget, which puts it at about $140 million. But those are always negotiable. The big thing, what has never been negotiated, though, is their TV grant of rights, which Clemson, like every other ACC team, has signed over to the ACC for the duration of their TV deal, and that runs through 2036. That's how every conference these days stay together, because even if you leave, your TV rights in the conference stay in the conference until the TV deal expires. So you would be no good to your new conference at all because your TV rights don't come with you. So all these exits are always timed with the expiration of their TV deals. Legally, it's been ironclad. No one has ever gotten out. Clemson is now trying. Florida State is also suing them. So the ACC looks like they're coming apart at the seams right now.
So, Dave, I have to wonder, does this have anything to do with the college football playoff agreeing to a 6-year deal with ESPN worth nearly $8 billion?
You know, I think the timing is a coincidence, but that deal has only widened the gap, actually, between the ACC and the SEC and Big Ten schools. You know, the ACC will get $13 million per school per season with this new deal, while the SEC and Big Ten get just over $20 million. Now, to rewind, you know, just 2 years ago, we had the Power 5 conferences. That was the ACC, SEC, Big Ten, Big 12, and Pac-12. But the Pac-12 was disintegrated after the best schools left for the Big Ten. Meanwhile, the best Big 12 schools went to the SEC, making the Big Ten and the SEC really the Super 2 conferences, while the Big 12 and the ACC have kind of taken a back seat to the Super 2. Now the best schools in the ACC, they seem to want out. They seem to want to join the SEC and Big Ten. It's kind of the ugly side of college sports with all this money going around right now.
All right, Dave, as always, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Don.
With the start of spring just hours away, the cherry blossoms in Washington, D.C. are beginning to bloom. The National Park Service says the cherry trees at the National Mall have already reached peak bloom. It's the second earliest peak bloom following one of D.C.'s warmest ever winters. The earliest peak bloom on record was in 1990. In 1912, Japan gifted cherry trees to the United States to be planted in the nation's capital as a gesture of friendship. The Yoshino trees usually bloom over several days depending on the weather. And across the country in Washington state, the delicate pink and white flowers have started blooming as well. Spring falls on the vernal equinox when the amount of day and night are roughly equal. This is the earliest in March that the equinox has fallen since 1896. And that's all for today's news. For more coverage, visit us at ntd.com or download our app. That's all for today's news. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Don Ma, and good night.